You were taught that light is a thing, sometimes a wave, sometimes a particle. Depending on the experiment, it politely switches costumes so the story still works. That explanation feels clever enough that most people accept it and move on. Physics did not. Because the moment you stop using metaphors and look at what actually happens, light refuses to be either of those things in the way you imagine. This is where the trouble starts. If light were a wave in the ordinary sense, it would need something to wave in. Water waves need water. Sound waves need air. But light moves just fine through empty space. Not slowed, not weakened, not confused by the absence of a medium. So people invented a medium. The ether, invisible, everywhere, perfectly rigid, and completely undetectable. That idea collapsed under experiment. If light were a particle in the ordinary sense, it would travel like one. It wouldn't spread. It wouldn't interfere with itself. It wouldn't create patterns that only make sense if something is overlapping and canceling out. So people compromised. Light is both, they said. A wave when you don't look, a particle when you do. That sounds profound until you notice it explains nothing. It just replaces confusion with a slogan. Feynman hated that kind of explanation because it pretends the mystery is solved when it has only been renamed. Calling light wave-particle duality doesn't tell you what light is. It tells you your classical categories are failing. That failure is the point. The shock is not that light is strange. The shock is that it refuses to be anything familiar at all. When you strip away the metaphors, light is not a wave. It is not a particle. It is not a thing moving through space in the way you imagine motion. Light is a process. And processes do not fit neatly into nouns. When light travels from a source to a detector, nothing like a tiny object traces a path through space. There is no little bead racing along. There is no oscillating substance rippling through a medium. What exists instead is a probability amplitude, a mathematical object that assigns likelihoods to interactions. Light does not move through space the way a car moves down a road. It exists as a set of possibilities that only collapse into an outcome when something interacts with it. That interaction is the only moment when you get something definite. Before that, asking where the light is may have no answer. This is not philosophical wordplay. It is how the predictions work. In the double-slit experiment, light does not choose one path or the other. It explores all allowed paths, not metaphorically, mathematically. The pattern on the screen emerges from the interference of those possibilities. No wave sloshing through space. No particle secretly picking a route. Just a rule that says all allowed paths contribute. This is why trying to picture light always fails. You are trying to imagine a thing where only a rule exists. Light is not an object traveling. It is an interaction waiting to happen. Now consider how this reframes speed. You were taught that light travels at a certain speed, the fastest speed possible. That sounds like light is racing through space as fast as it can go. But that picture is wrong too. Light does not experience time. From light's own perspective, if that word even applies, emission and absorption are the same event. There is no passage in between. The distance light crosses is a feature of space-time, not of light itself. Light is not hurrying. Space-time is structured so that light-like paths have zero proper time. This is why nothing can outrun light. Not because light is fast, but because it defines the structure of space-time itself. It sets the limit of how cause and effect are arranged. Light is not moving through space-time. It is moving as space-time allows. That alone should unsettle you. Now look at how light carries energy and momentum. Again, you are tempted to imagine something being transported, little packets flying from place to place. But energy is not a substance, and neither is momentum. They are conserved quantities, numbers that stay balanced because of symmetry. Light carries energy because interactions involving light change the energy accounting. That's it. There is no glowing cargo being delivered. This is why light can be both incredibly gentle and incredibly destructive. It is not the thing that matters. It is the interaction. A single photon can be barely detectable. Enough photons arranged the right way can vaporize steel. The difference is not the light, it is the configuration. Once again, the universe refuses to give you a comforting picture. Light is not a stream of particles. It is not a vibrating medium. It is not a thing flying through emptiness. It is a set of rules that assign probabilities to interactions across space-time. This is why, the moment you try to measure light's path, you change the outcome. Not because light is shy, but because paths were never the right concept to begin with. The universe does not keep track of where light is when nothing interacts with it. That information simply does not exist. This is the shock most people never fully absorb. Reality does not fill in details just because you want them filled in. Light is defined by what it does, not by what it is between events. Feynman understood this deeply. That's why he avoided poetic descriptions and focused on what could be calculated. He knew that any picture you draw of light will mislead you if you take it literally. The truth is harsher and simpler. Light is not a thing traveling from here to there. It is the rule governing how electromagnetic interactions propagate. And the moment you accept that, the mystery doesn't disappear, it sharpens. If light is not an object moving through space, then the question, what is light made of, collapses immediately. There is no substance to analyze, no tiny bead to crack open, no wave material to examine under a microscope. Light is not made of anything. That sounds absurd, until you notice how often physics reaches that conclusion. Light is an excitation of the electromagnetic field. But even that sentence misleads if you picture a disturbance traveling like a ripple on water. Fields are not materials. They do not slosh. They do not vibrate in space. A field is a rule book. It tells you what interactions are allowed at each point in space-time. When conditions change, the outcomes change. That change is what you experience as light. Light is not something inside the field. It is what happens when the field interacts. This is why light has no rest frame. You cannot sit next to a photon and watch it go by. That idea doesn't just fail experimentally, it fails conceptually. Rest frames belong to objects that persist through time. Light does not. Light is not something that exists during the journey. It is something that exists as the connection between events. Emission here, absorption there. The rest is bookkeeping. This is why light's speed is always the same, no matter how fast you're moving. It is not adjusting itself to keep up. It is not racing you. The structure of space-time demands that light-like connections have the same numerical value for everyone. Light does not obey space-time. Space-time is built around light. Once you see that, the old wave and particle metaphors stop being clever and start being obstacles. They were never meant to be literal. They were scaffolding. And you've been leaning on them long after the building was finished. This is why interference happens even when photons are sent one at a time. Nothing is interfering with anything else. There is no hidden wave piling up. There is just a rule that says multiple possible histories contribute to the final probability. Light does not go through one slit or the other. The question is malformed. The universe does not choose a path until an interaction demands one. This is also why light behaves differently depending on how you measure it. Not because it changes its nature, but because nature never had the properties you are trying to measure in the first place. You are not revealing what light is. You are forcing an outcome that was never defined. That is the part most people resist. They want reality to be filled in everywhere, all the time. Physics does not support that desire. Reality is economical. It does not specify more than it has to. Now consider polarization, because this is where intuition usually gives up completely. Light can be polarized in different directions. That sounds like a wave vibrating in space. But polarization is not an orientation of a physical oscillation. It is a property of how interactions transform under rotation. Once again, the math works perfectly. Without ever referring to a picture of something waving, you are not observing motion, you are observing symmetry. Every property of light that seems physical turns out to be relational. Direction, frequency, energy, polarization. None of them belong to light by itself. They belong to the interaction between light and whatever measures it. Light has no color until something absorbs it, no direction until something detects it, no energy until something exchanges it. Between those events, the universe does not bother assigning properties. This is the part that feels shocking, because it means the universe is not fully specified when you are not looking. Not because it is incomplete, but because completeness was never required. Feynman used to emphasize this in a way that unsettled people. He pointed out that nature doesn't care about your need for a picture. It cares about whether the calculations agree with experiment. And they do. Perfectly. Every time you try to force light into a familiar category, you end up inventing paradoxes that aren't really there. The paradoxes disappear the moment you stop demanding that light behave like a thing. Light is not a traveler. It is a connection. It is how the electromagnetic field allows information, energy, and momentum to be exchanged between events. That's why light sits at the boundary of causality. Nothing can influence anything faster than light. Not because light is special, but because that boundary is built into space-time itself. Light does not respect causality. Light defines it. Once you accept that, the shock stops being about light and starts being about you. Your intuitions were built to track objects. Light is not one. Your language was built to describe things. Light is not one. Your metaphors were built for survival. Light lives at the edge of what survival ever needed to explain. So what is light really? Not a wave, not a particle, not a thing. Light is the rule that governs how electromagnetic interactions connect events across space-time. And the moment you stop trying to imagine it and start accepting it, the mystery doesn't vanish. It becomes precise. You think of vision as something light does to you. Light travels from objects, enters your eyes, and delivers information. That story sounds reasonable, but it quietly assumes light exists as a carrier, like a messenger bringing news from one place to another. That picture is wrong. Nothing arrives at your eye carrying an image of the world. What happens instead is a chain of interactions, each one defined by the same rules. atoms in an object interact with the electromagnetic field. Those interactions make other interactions possible elsewhere. When something finally interacts with the molecules in your retina, your nervous system constructs a story. Light does not bring information. Information is created when interactions occur. Between emission and absorption, nothing like an image exists. There is no miniature photograph traveling through space. There is only a set of allowed possibilities connecting two events. This is why light does not fade as it travels through empty space. There is nothing there to weaken. There is no substance being diluted. The probability of interaction remains the same until something intervenes. This is also why light can be delayed, bent, redshifted, or blue-shifted, without anything happening to it in the way you imagine. Space-time changes the relationships between events. Light follows those relationships. Once again, light is not affected. The structure is. Now consider reflection, because this is where the everyday story collapses completely. You imagine light bouncing off surfaces like a ball hitting a wall. That is not what happens. Photons are not little bullets ricocheting around. Reflection is not a collision. Reflection is a collective interaction between electromagnetic fields and the charged particles in a material. The outgoing light is not the incoming light bouncing back. It is a new interaction whose probability is determined by the material's structure. The light you see from an object was not hiding inside it. It was not stored there waiting to be released. It is generated in the interaction. This is why objects do not look the same under all lighting conditions. The color of an object is not a property it possesses. It is a relationship between the object, the light, and the observer. Light does not carry color. Color is an outcome. Every time you think light is delivering something ready-made, physics tells you the same thing. No. The universe does not work that way. Now, take the most unsettling step of all. If light is not a thing traveling through space, then the idea of a photon path is not just misleading. It is meaningless. In quantum electrodynamics, light does not choose a single route. All possible paths contribute, not just the shortest, not just the straightest. All of them. The probability of an interaction depends on the sum of contributions from every allowed history. This is not a metaphor. It is how the calculations are done. Light does not go from A to B. The universe computes the relationship between A and B. That computation is what you observe. This is why Feynman insisted on focusing on amplitudes rather than pictures. Pictures lie. Amplitudes work. Once you see this, the shock is not that light is weird. The shock is that your demand for a picture was never justified. Light behaves exactly as it should in a universe governed by consistent rules. The strangeness comes from expecting those rules to look like everyday objects. And now we reach the final inversion. Light is not what illuminates the universe. Light is what reveals that the universe does not need illumination to exist. Reality is not made visible by light. Reality is structured in such a way that interactions can occur at all. Light is one of the simplest ways those interactions connect distant events. This is why the universe can exist perfectly well without light in most regions. Light is not the foundation of reality. It is a consequence of how charges and fields interact. So when you ask what light really is, the answer is not something you can picture. Light is not an entity. It is a rule. It is a constraint. It is a connection. It is how the electromagnetic field allows cause and effect to meet across space-time. And the moment you stop trying to imagine it as a thing moving through space, the shock fades into something quieter, understanding. At the end of all this, The shock is not that light is mysterious. The shock is that it never needed to be familiar in the first place. You were taught to expect reality to be built out of things. Objects that move, collide, bounce, and persist. When something doesn't fit that picture, the instinct is to force it in anyway. Wave, particle, duality, compromise. Light refused every one of those attempts, not because it is exotic, but because the universe does not care about the categories your intuition prefers. Light is not a thing traveling through space. It is not a vibration of a substance. It is not a stream of tiny bullets. It is the rule that determines how electromagnetic interactions connect events. Once you accept that, the old questions lose their grip. Where is the light between source and detector? That question assumes there is something there to locate. Physics does not support that assumption. What path does the photon take? That question assumes a path existed before an interaction demanded one. Physics does not assign paths that way. How does light know where to go? It doesn't. There is no going. There is only a relationship between emission and absorption, constrained by the structure of space-time. The universe is not animating light. It is permitting interactions. This is why light does not age, why it does not experience time, why you cannot ride alongside it. Those ideas belong to objects that persist through moments. Light does not. Light exists at the boundary where the concept of during stops making sense. From the universe's point of view, light is not something happening over time. It is a connection between two events that space-time allows to be linked. That is why light defines causality, not because it is fast, but because it sets the geometry of what before and after can even mean. Nothing can outrun light, because nothing can outrun the structure of space-time itself. Once you see that, the famous speed of light stops feeling like a speed and starts feeling like a rule, a limit written into reality. This is why Feynman never tried to sell people a comforting picture of light. He knew that any picture would eventually lie to you. He focused instead on what could be calculated, predicted, and tested. And what emerges from that discipline is not confusion, but clarity. Light is simple in the only way that matters. Not simple to imagine, simple to describe accurately. It obeys a small set of rules, and those rules explain everything we observe, without inventing invisible substances or secret mechanisms. The universe does not need light to be a thing. It needs light to be consistent. And it is. So what is light, really? It is the way the electromagnetic field connects distant events. It is the boundary of causality. It is the reason space-time has the structure it does. It is not what illuminates reality. It is what reveals that reality does not need illumination to exist. The shock is not that light is strange. The shock is that once you stop demanding a picture, there is nothing strange left at all, only rules, and they work.